All right. Rest assured, as a building principal, you do not have to handle the particulars. In a small district, your superintendent's office will handle it. In a suburban, larger district, all right, or a city district, you're going to have a personnel department, and they're going to handle all of this. Wait, I want you to be aware of it because you need to be aware of all this that's holding up your appointments and why. Well, what's the process? I want you to be the smartest kid on the block when you get into your positions as the building principals. Okay, tonight's session, we're going to discuss certificated types and tenure, certification and tenure, well, certification types and tenure, and then we're going to get into board appointments, which I think I hope. It's kind of wonky, but I hope you'll find it interesting. All right, let's explore certification and tenure areas. We're going to do a little exploring. I want you to go to nyscd.gov, please, and follow through with me. You go to nyscd.gov. When you get there, under NYSCD, I want you to go to Program Offices. After you go to Program Offices, you're going to find, well, let me make sure. Sometimes I say things and I might have skipped a step. NYSCD Program Offices, scroll down the page, Teaching Initiatives and Certification. Is that what I said? Yep, Teaching Initiatives and Certification. Go to Certification. And if I go to Certification, yes, I'm going to get the page that looks like this, that's on the PowerPoint. And if you click on Types of Certificates and Licenses, you will come here. And then you got Classroom Teacher Types. Click on that. Are y'all following me? Are y'all good? No one's having any stumbling blocks? Okay, good. Then you will come here, Classroom Teaching Certificate Titles. And there's a long list. By the way, I want to tell you a little story, by the way. Types of certificates and licenses, classroom teacher types. I skipped a step there, didn't I? Yeah, I think I skipped a step. You have to, on that page that says certificates currently available for all applicants, click on Initial Certificate, and then you'll get available titles, list of available classroom teaching titles. Interesting. The story I was going to tell you was about I'm working with, no, it'll take too much time, forget it. There's another page that has teaching titles too, but this is, for the purposes of tonight's lesson, this is good enough, all right? So these are your classroom teaching certificate titles. Just going down through the pages. All right. Now, that's how you find them, all right? That's the first thing you need to know. Because as you should know, and probably do know, certificates and tenure are two different things. They're related, whereas you have to have a certain certificate in order to gain tenure and work 40% of time in that tenure area. But certificates and tenure are two different things. So I just showed you where to go to find the certifications. That's the first content that you need to know. But now I'm going to take you over to tenure areas, which are different. And tenure areas, we're going to have to go to, look at my slide 33 on the PowerPoint. We're going to have to go to something called Westlaw via Cornell Legal Information Institute. So let me walk you through this. I want you to go back to, not back to, I want you to go to remember Cornell? Cornell Legal Institute, Legal Information Institute. Go there. Actually, I think I put it in the did I? No, I didn't. So follow me through. Go to Cornell. Go to Get the Law, hover over Get the Law, top left. Come down to Law by Jurisdiction and go to State Law. There's something I discovered today preparing for 650. If you try to go to Westlaw, you got to pay. I couldn't get there by going directly to Westlaw. But I remembered that if you went through Cornell, you could get to Westlaw for free. Ta-da! So don't forget that. All right. So go to Cornell, go to Get the Law, go to Law by Jurisdiction, go to State Law. You come to a page, all right, that has listing, law by source, state, listing by jurisdiction. You've done this before. This should be familiar to you. Go to New York, and under the heading Regulations and Other Agency Materials, see Code, Rules, and Regulations. Click on that, and you will get this Westlaw page, this page here, Department of State Division of Administrative Rules. It says View the Unofficial NYCRR online here. Click on that hyperlink, and then you get to a page that looks like this. Let me make sure that you all get there first. That's right, Shaban. Give me the thumbs up. Thank you, Caitlin. Let's make sure you're all with me.
I'm sorry, my computer froze up when you were speaking. I've got it loaded now, and I'm at the where am I at? The New York legal materials. Where did you say to go after that?
The New York legal materials. Go down the page, Wendy. I love that new feature. I could tell who was speaking to me because you had your hand over your mouth and I couldn't see your lips move.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, because it's showing up on my screen. You see where it says regulatory and other agency materials? Codes, rules, and regulations?
Yes.
Click on that, Wendy.
Got it. Thank you.
Then you get a page that says Department of State, Division of Administrative Rules. The only hyperlink you have there is the one up towards the top. View the unofficial NYCRR online here.
Got it.
Got it?
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure. Then you wind up with a page that looks like what's on my screen right now on the PowerPoint. All right. Click on Education Department and see my slide 35? Before I go there, let me get the thumbs up. Wendy's there, I know. Who else is there? Caitlin's there, Shaban, Stephanie, Michael, Gina. Adrian, you got an error message? Well, that's odd because everybody else is getting in there.
No, it looks like Dominique got an error message too, and Victoria.
All right. Okay, well, this is good. I think you can follow along with me on my screen then, because I think from here on out, I'm okay. So those of you who got an error message, stay with me on my PowerPoint. Before I click, I want you to notice of interest to us here will be Chapter 1, the rules of the Board of Regents. But also of interest, look at regulations of the commissioner. I'll come to that later. I've shown you how to get to the Part 100 and the Part 200 regulations through the nyscd.gov site. But through this Westlaw site, you can get to all of the regulations. So you need to have that in your toolbox as well. And as I just said, to get to Westlaw free, it looks to me like you have to go through Cornell. Because I couldn't get to Westlaw for free, unless I signed up, and I didn't feel like signing up. Because I knew there was another way to get there. All right, so if we go to Rules of the Board of Regents, then we're going to come to this. All right, you would scroll down and come to Part 30, Tenure Areas at APPR. Make note of this as well. You're going to find tenure areas. I'll click on that in a moment, but notice also that APPR is there. Let me just take a moment to explain what's going on there. We've talked about this before. Tell me, if you would, what is the statute that APPR is based on? What is the education law? You had to do it for an assignment. This is review. What's the law? Caitlin, please.
3012D.
Very good, my friend. So 3012D is the law. And remember, I told you that eventually we would have to have regulations. And in this case, these are rules of the Board of Regents, all right, that expand upon the statute, right, Caitlin? Because the statute is not specific enough. So here's where you'll find all of the APPR regulations and rules under Part 30. We're not interested in that right now, but just so you know, if you're looking for APPR, all the specifics in it, here's where you'll find the rules and regulations, okay? But for our purposes, and Adrian and the rest of you, you can still stay with me on the PowerPoint. If I click on Part 30, I'm going to come here, Adrian. All right. Notice the Part 30-2, that's APPR, and Part 30-3. All right. One is -2, Caitlin, is for when it was 3012C. The first time it came out, remember, conducted prior to 2015-16. So that's 3012C, the first time it came out. And then, as Caitlin correctly said, 3012D is the current law, and that's for after 2015-16. All right, so make sure you've got that distinction. But back to today's lesson, we don't care about that right now, except to put that in your toolbox for later, for when you're principals. Instead, we're going to click on tenure areas, Adrian, and the rest of you, okay? I wonder if, Victoria, because I got traffic going there, if they only let so many people in at a time. Really a small number of people, but nevertheless. Okay. So if I were to click on tenure areas, then I'm going to wind up here, and notice I'm going to get elementary tenure area, middle grades tenure area, and academic tenure area, special subject tenure areas. So we're not going to look at all of them, but this is where they are. All right, this is where they're located. This is why you need to know this. I wish somebody had been smart enough to tell this to me in 1982. Who knows the heights I could have achieved. Anyways, this is where it's found. This is what you need to know. And if we pick one of, well, I'm not going to look at each one of them. This is where they are. There's no testing on this. It's just, where is it? That's all you need to know. Where is it? For future reference. Now you know, all right? But to make the point that certification and tenure are two different things, but that they are related, I've got a little exercise for us to take a look at. Let's match certification to tenure areas. Now don't go ahead. Take a look at my slide. In your mind, draw a line, if you will, or if you've printed out your PowerPoint, draw a line from the certification area to the proper tenure area. And on the next slide, I did it for us. This will help me make a point. And in a way, this is what your personnel department is going through. They know that they need someone with a particular certification. That's the first thing that your well, as a building principal, it's the first thing you want to know. I need someone with French certification. I need someone with biology certification. I need someone with chemistry certification. That's what you care about. But then the personnel department has to match the certification with the tenure area, because this is where we're heading. Eventually, you have to have a properly worded board appointment resolution that mentions the certification area and the appropriate tenure area, because it's in the tenure area that you receive seniority. Now, hang on, Stephanie, I'm not there yet, but this is where you're going to come in soon to remind me. Notice what I said. You accrue seniority in a tenure area, not in a certification area. Can someone get tenure in two areas? Certainly they can, Victoria. If they work 40% of the time in one area. So if you've got someone doing a 50-50 split, they could get tenure simultaneously in two areas, because they have to work at least 40% in a particular area to get tenure. All right, good question, Victoria. But let's look now. Look at the match. Childhood education, grade 1 through 6 is easy. Here's the certification. Here's the tenure area: elementary, common branch, subject, the kindergarten, up through grade 6. That's an easy one. Notice bio and chemistry, though. Look at the tenure area. Science, 7 through 12. Uh-oh. It may not be apparent right now, but on the next slide, you're going to see the problems that creates. So you've got two different certifications winding up in an identical tenure area. This is an old problem that's never been addressed by Albany. I'll explain in a minute. Look at French and Spanish as well. Oh, I didn't draw a line. Should have a line here. Spanish and French should go to foreign language 7 through 12. Same problem that you have with science 7 through 12, you have with languages other than English. All certification areas in LOTE wind up in the foreign language 7 through 12 certification area. What about TESOL? K through 12? I don't know, Lindsay. It's a good question. I'd have to spend time researching it. You'd have to find if you have in those tenure areas we looked at earlier, Lindsay, you have to look to see of the 3 or 4, especially those special subject areas, if you find one that matches TESOL.
Okay.
Okay? But it's a very good question, and the type of research you need to do to make sure that you're getting the right person with the right certification, and to make sure that they get appointed properly, although it is your superintendent's job to make sure that happens. You know the old saying, poop flows downhill? If they get it wrong, you know who's going to suffer the consequences? You at the building level after they muck it up. All right? And notice math. Notice the certification happens with math, and there's one tenure area. So there's a 1-to-1. All right, so I want you to notice that, yes, Clarissa.
Just something to be aware of in the elementary, you'll notice the certification says grades 1 through 6, and your tenure says pre-K, that it's getting harder and harder to find teachers that are coming out with that pre-K and kindergarten certification because of Albany and the way that they put the certifications. But it's something you have to be very careful in making sure you have that certification for.
Great, and thank you for saying that, because it reminds me, Clarissa, of the changes that they made about 10 years ago to special education and all the certification changes that they went through there. They really complicated that as well. And so certification and tenure areas in special ed are also fraught with danger, and you got to get it right. Thank you, Clarissa. Very good point. All right, so here's a problem that I want to bring up to you. Consider this scenario. So put your high school principal hat on for a minute. In the high school, you offer sections of physics, biology, earth science, and chemistry. Typical, right? Due to budget cuts, you have to eliminate one full-time equivalent position in courses with low enrollment. Physics has the lowest enrollment. The least senior teacher in the science 7th through 12 tenure area is the bio teacher, though. And remember what I said earlier? Seniority is determined by tenure area, not certification. So your least senior teacher is your bio teacher. Common sense says you want to get rid of physics because that's the lowest enrollment, or maybe not get rid of it, but cut it down to part-time, like 0.5 FTE. Just for the sake of review, tell me, hand up, what's a full-time equivalent? How do we write that numerically? Full-time equivalent. A full-time person is what? Michael? Yeah, Lindsay's got it. Very good. Lindsay's got it. Jeannie's got it. Thank you, Michael. 1.0. In the chat box, someone, what would be a part-time teacher? Strictly part-time. Very good, Dominique. Victoria, 0.4, well, yeah, the way I phrased the question, you're right, Victoria. What would be, Victoria, what would be 2 days a week? Stephanie, yes, Victoria, 0.2. Stephanie, you gave me 0.6. How many days a week is 0.6, Steph? 3, yeah. So we got, the pie is broken up into 5 days. 20%, 0.2. 40%, 2 days, 0.4. 0.5, 2.5 days, literally. All right. Can you have 0.25? Yeah, you could, theoretically. They work a day and a half. All right. Getting back to the board resolutions, that's why all of this needs to be spelled out. Where I'm leading here is to try to recognize, first thing first, that at some point in time, someone's going to say, what's your status? And the only place to really go is back to your seniority lists. And some districts do a poor job of maintaining the seniority lists. And if your seniority lists are messed up, where do you think you have to go? Back to your board resolutions. And if your board resolutions don't say everything you need to say, then you got a problem. And with the old adage again, poop flows downhill. If you got a problem with who is going to get laid off, you as the building principal might be the one who has to wrestle with that. So back to this problem, you have to lay off the bio teacher or reduce them to part-time. Because the most senior person, that's the least senior person in that tenure area. Same problem with LOTE. You might want it to return German to part-time, but it's the French teacher who's the least senior. It creates a problem. Albany has never tackled the problem. All right? I understand that school has to let the bio teacher go, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you have to work around it. So you might have someone, Victoria, working out of their tenure area. All right? Remember, let's see if I have this right. You can work one out of your assignments out of your tenure area. Thanks, Wendy. I saw the correct figure go up there. So one out of your tenure area. So that helps you, Victoria. Maybe you get rid of that bio teacher, but you work it out so that your chemistry teacher takes one of the physics classes and your earth science teacher takes one of the other physics, and you work it out. But that's the point about the poop flowing down hills, Wendy or Victoria. You're going to have to deal with it in the scheduling department to find a way to make it work. To point out the problem. Here's at least 2 tenure areas where you have that problem. Clarissa, please.
I have a question on hiring, and this is going to pertain more to the elementary. If you have several teachers that you're hiring at one board meeting, what establishes the hierarchy in who received tenure first? Is it alphabetical order?
Perfect segue. Stephanie, you're absolved of your responsibility. Perfect segue, Clarissa. We'll go right to it. There's a number of ways that can be handled, Clarissa. First of all, because it does matter. First of all, you might have a board policy that says, because you get to determine it at the district level. So you might have a policy, Clarissa, that says alphabetically. Your policy might also say temporally, where in the agenda that they appeared and when were they approved. So even in terms of a consent agenda, which I'll show you later, where they appear in that consent agenda, even though they're all voted on at the same time, where they appear in that consent agenda may have a difference. But if you don't have a policy, Clarissa, based upon what you do, you establish a practice. So to give you this a story, in Gowanda, we had a consistent practice during my 12 years and even earlier that where the person appeared in the board agenda determined in terms of time, and it might even be a minute that separated them. A minute might separate them. And that's who had more seniority when they were appointed in terms of temporal or time. Now, Clarissa, that brings up a point. First of all, the superintendent and the building principal should be in conversations. Who do you want to be? Your super should come to you and say, you did the interviews. You're hiring 3 elementary teachers in your building with the same, in the same tenure area, Clarissa. Who do you think has the most potential? Who do you want to be first and most senior? And then you, Clarissa, as building principal, would say, well, I think Felicello's got the most promise, followed by Malin and Spear. And your super should put those people in that order for you. All right. This is, I was thinking as I was preparing for class yesterday, this is a good way of making the point. Remember I talked to you in the beginning about leadership and management and how it's hard to talk about how to be a leader. And I talked to you about the way you get this job done is by knowing the particulars about the job, all the management roles of it. So you really can't lead in terms of recruiting and appointing staff unless you know the particulars. So the management of our jobs is extremely particular and idiosyncratic. And I hope what the question Clarissa asked makes that point, that a minute can separate someone in a seniority ranking. Okay, Clarissa? But good question, very timely. And that's the one I was going to have Stephanie remind me of. Wendy?
Could that be something that if the employee is laid off because of that, could they go and fight it in court?
No.
No?
No, because there's established practice across the state. PERB would not even hear it.
Gotcha.
Now, I do have to say, I was a secondary guy, and I never ran into this tenure problem with different certifications in any other area. There may be more, but I'm simply not aware of them. I never ran into any others but science and load. But they are illustrative of the problem. Oh, Clarissa, thank you. Alphabetical order may be the case as well. If that's your practice, you're putting in alphabetical order. But let me ask you, Clarissa, how would you, given that the districts have the authority to establish their own practice and or put it into policy, how would you like it to work? Do you want it to work alphabetical?
We had this alphabetical years ago, and it has come up as issue of really there was 1 letter difference between somebody's name. Their second letter was farther along in the alphabet. In the last few years here, we have gone to doing, as you had mentioned, where the building principal gets to select the order that somebody is hired, and that's what goes on the agenda and how they are hired in that order. But I was just kind of surprised in such a high-functioning world in education that alphabetical order could honestly be the way that it was done. So.
Well, that's what you just chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
You always had what kind of process did you go through to change? Just from one board meeting to the next, you decided to change it?
I honestly don't remember because at that point I was a teacher. I had my tenure. You stay in your own woodchuck burrow and you don't pay attention.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So that can happen. I want you to be aware of that. All right. Certification, tenure, 2 different things. They got to line up. Now, let's talk about awarding of tenure, because obviously state education department awards certifications, right? And the universities recommend you for tenures. New York State awards it. But tenure is up to the school, recommended by the superintendent and approved by the board. So under these regulations, again, 30-1.3, which we know already we would find under the Board of Regents rules in Westlaw. Here we have each Board of Education and Board of Cooperative Educational Services, BOCES, shall in each, let me just check, by the way. So Lindsay, you're still with me, very good. Rebecca, you're still
here.
very good. Okay.
I'm still here.
Thank you. The regulations actually outline in each resolution making a probationary appointment or an appointment on tenure set forth the name, this is in regulation, the name of the appointee, the tenure areas or areas in which the professional will devote a substantial portion of his time, 40%, Victoria, all right? The expiration date of the appointment, if made on a probationary basis, provided that for appointments of classroom teachers and building principals made on or after July 1st, 2015. Why? Because of what Caitlin said, 3012D. The resolution must reflect that except to the extent required by the provision of education law, in order to grant tenure, classroom teacher, building principals have received composite or overall annual APPR review ratings pursuant to education law 3012C or D of either effective or highly effective in at least 3 of the 4 preceding years, and if the classroom teacher receives ineffective composite overall rating in the final year, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, you have to have in the resolution that information, because 3012C and D changed the length of the probationary periods from 3 to 4 years, and not only extended the amount of time under probation, but said you had to have effective ratings in at least 3 of the 4 preceding years. Another reason superintendents were kind of upset with this whole change, all right? But nevertheless, that's in the regulation. That's what your appointment notices should stay. Now, to go to a very reliable source, by the way, I got to admit, I'm a union guy. I have no problems with NYSUT. I have no problems with AFT. I think working under the Taylor Law with unions is a very good thing. It helps us to know the rules of the road, all right? And so I would also sometimes go to NYSUT because they do a very good job of deciphering laws and regulations and making them clear for rank and file teachers and principals. So here are the summary of the tenure changes. Began in 2015. I don't think I'll go through all of them. Well, yeah, I will. These probationary periods extended from 3 to 4 years for untenured teachers. Boards of education will no longer be able to specify an end date for the probationary teachers, and teachers will notify that the tenure will be on their APPR ratings. You no longer be able to specify an end date to the probationary period. A teacher seeking tenure would need to attain an effective or highly effective rate for at least 3 of the 4 years. They don't need to be consecutive. A teacher rated ineffective in the 4th year cannot receive tenure at that time. A board can agree to extend the probationary period, thus offering a 5th year. Later on, I'll define that for you. That's called a jewel. That additional year is referred to as a jewel agreement. I'll get to it momentarily. A tenured teacher, a school district, obtains from another district will have now have a 3-year probationary period. So if you got tenure in another district in the old way, all right, you could get 2 years counting towards your 3 years of probation. But now because it's 4 years, you'll now have 3-year probationary period. So you get credit for your for one of your previous tenure areas, provided you didn't receive an ineffective. And school boards will be able to terminate probation without regard to APPR. That's good because 3012C was kind of iffy on that. And superintendents were very worried that we could not terminate someone who had an effective or highly effective rating. You might ask, why not? Well, they might be a pain in your keister. They might not get the reports in. Not all teacher rubrics, the teacher evaluation rubrics, mention everything that is part of being a teacher or a principal. That's another problem. So they got a great rating, but only because the rubric that had been negotiated didn't include attendance and being in your room on time. All right? And getting your reports done on time. So those are the summary of the tenure changes. I'm not going to go over this. You can take a look at yourself, all right? Now, let me change. Those are the tenure requirements, all right? I would have to change my name. Ours is alphabet, okay. Let's go to recruitment selection appointment process. I do want to point out you New York City folks, because you are different than others. You need to, if you're going to be talking about recruitment, interviewing, the selection appointment process, you've got to go look, Siobhan and others, at the commissioner's regulations. Because under the volume C, these are the regulations that address employee issues from hiring determination, Siobhan. And I think you know this. They talk about, New York City talks about a selection process, all right? And it entails things like the online application, a phone interview, possibly, the selection day, beginning training. It says here that it consists of 3 parts. Talk about the online application and what you need to do. It's very prescriptive. Another class told me that they don't necessarily do the phone interviews. Siobhan, can you elaborate on that? Do you know that this is in place? Oh, it says right here, some candidates may skip the phone interview and move directly to selection day. Selection day, a sacrosanct part of the process? Don't know? Okay.
I know that they have a new teacher finder you have to be a part of to be hired, something like that, but the principals interview, and they can't hire them unless they're part of that. So I'm guessing this process was is after me, and must just be to get into that new teacher database.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. By the way, just an aside. Thank you, Rebecca. I'll see you next week, hopefully. All right, so at least here's the major point. You got to refer to the regulations, the chancellor's regs, you New York City people. There's something called selection day, where a select group of candidates will be invited to an in-person interview. I didn't copy the slide here, but I know that according to those regulations that you have to have committees put together, especially for principals. You have to have committees put together, including parents and teachers, possibly students. So there's a lot of detail in the chancellor's regulation that deals with you folks in New York City, all right? Those of us who are not in New York City, all right, have our process is not defined, all right? But there are protocols we need to go through. I should say our protocols are not embedded in regulations like New York City, but there are still protocols you need to adhere to. So let's start. Let's talk about the recruitment process. You're going to have to, first of all, you're going to have to post a vacancy, because more likely than not, the collective bargaining agreement, whether it be a civil service group that's in a Teamsters maybe, or CSEA, your collective bargaining agreement is most likely going to have a posting requirement. That's an internal posting requirement. You must post for 10 days. All right? And that's got to go out. It's stipulated in the contract. It says where you need to post and for how long. So you're going to need to post. And then you don't need to advertise. Now, if you've got someone in mind, you have to post. because of the union, but you don't have to advertise. So as a building principal, you're going to have to wait at least maybe 10 days to be able to interview people, but maybe you've got someone in the pipeline, you choose not to post, not to advertise. If you do advertise, well, then you got to be cognizant of the fact that that's going to take some time. If you're trying to get a wide pool, well, you want to put it in our area, the Buffalo News. And I think it's still Thursdays when they issue the employment pages. How many days are you going to put it in there? 1 Thursday, 2 weeks, 2 Thursdays? And based upon that, all right, you're going to get a larger pool of individuals, which is good. It's going to take longer. Yes, Gina, you can just post within your school and not publicly. Absolutely. Well, I should say, Gina, just to be clear, and I doubt it's in there, but unless your bargaining agreement says you must also advertise. But your bargaining units, your unions, Gina, they don't care about anyone but their membership. So they don't care if you're posting outside, advertising outside, Gina. All they want to know is that you're posting inside. That's who they're trying to protect. So I doubt very much that anything says in CBA that you would publicly advertise. So the answer to your question is yes. Okay, so you advertise. Maybe your local penny savers. All right, job fairs. I started to attend job fairs in the Buffalo region, and that was very good, especially when I was looking for science teachers. Remember, rural superintendent, slim pickets when you get into those difficult areas. Same thing for you, Stephanie, even in a small city like Dunkirk, hard to find certifications. Clarissa, hard for you to find certain certifications. Gina, hard to find certain certifications. Adrian, not quite so difficult. All right, those of you in bigger districts. Siobhan, certainly not for you. That wouldn't be a problem. But you might want to go to a job fair. All right, you get to meet the people. They come to your booth, etc. You need a digital presence these days as well. There's so many different digital job recruitment services. I'm not even going to go through the list, but a digital presence is a good way to get people as well. But recognize there's a cutoff point between getting 600 applications and 50. You got to decide how wide you want to cast a net. Word of mouth also helps. You're a building principal. The example I gave earlier. You go to your principal's meeting, you're looking for a special certification in special education. You announce it at your principal's meeting, and then you get an email back from a principal the next day, Clarissa, saying that I just had to lay a person off. Or my daughter has that certification. I'll send her to you. Word of mouth works as well, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. All right? So the recruitment process can take many forms. Here are just a couple examples of what your personnel department would be doing. And if you're in a smaller district, your personnel people should be consulting with you as a building principal to see if you've got anyone in mind. All right, we'll post because the CBA requires it, but we're not going to spend $600 to $1,200 on a local newspaper post advertisement because you know who you're going to appoint. Okay, who you're going to recommend. Well, after you recruit and get those applications in, then someone's got to screen. Now, a building principal and a small team of individuals is a good group to screen. This is not the interview process. This is the screening. Let's say that you get 50 to 75 applications for a K through 6, PK through 6 position, or a 1 through 6 position, and you don't want to bring in 50 people. So all those are sent to your personnel department as they come in, and your superintendent or your personnel director calls up you, Stephanie Berghold, the building principal of school number 3, and says, here they are. Screen this group, go through this group, and get 10 individuals that you want to bring in. So Stephanie meets with her school psychologist. Maybe she's got an AP in her building. All right, maybe she's got a lead teacher. So she meets with that small group, and you set aside time to go through 50 applications for the purpose of screening and coming up with the 10 you want to put exposed to your interview committees. Got it? Remember that timeline, that Gantt chart I shared you with? I'm literally going through it again with you. Then, of course, once you come away with those 10 individuals that you want to interview, hopefully you've got 10. If you're looking for a physics teacher, you're lucky if you got 5 in a rural district. You're lucky if you got 2. Right, Clarissa? Let's take OTPT, Clarissa. Remember, this applies to this applies to civil service exempt people who need a special license and not competitive. So you might find 1 or 2 OTPT people, right, that you want to bring in. You're lucky if you get 1, right, Clarissa and Gina, in our small rural districts. Okay. Someone's got to establish the committees. In New York City, you've got it prescribed for you in regulation. In all the rest of us, you might have a board policy on this. You need to double check and make sure. But if you don't have a policy, you're going to work with your superintendent and your personnel department to decide, okay, what's our practice for establishing committees? Now, for building principals, there's a lot of community involvement in selecting building principals. Parents and teachers, all right, community members might even have students. For teachers, not quite as much parent and community involvement, but certainly a building principal. Yeah, Gina, you're OTPT through BOCES because you can't find it, and you're small enough, you're sharing them with another district. So you establish your committees and decide who's going to be on the interview committee. You need to decide upon the questions, because here's my caution. I know this is an exaggeration, but potentially everyone has a lawyer. And if they don't like the process you're going through, and that they think that they might have been discriminated against, they're going to want to see the records. And they're going to want to know what questions that people were asked. Now, let me give you a case in point. Let me just a little bit different. I remember that when we were hiring a building principal, of course, I was a small school scooper. I got the committee together, and I had to do a little interview committee development. And I asked the committee, what questions do you want to ask? Well, I'd like to know what religion that if they're married and what religion that they right, Gina. See the eyes get big? Here's the good thing. We did that ahead of time. And we didn't let the committees ask whatever they damn well pleased. It's just too dangerous. Because you can't ask what religion people, who they live with, what church do they go to. Small town people want to know what church you go to, all right? They want to know, did you have any kids? Well, that gets you back to marital status or living arrangements. When did you graduate from college? Well, that gets to age. So they got to be careful. And people, they don't know this, all right? Secretaries don't know this. Teachers don't know this necessarily. Certainly parents and students don't know this. So you need to work with the committees to decide upon the questions in advance. And if you're deciding that, for instance, for teachers, it's popular these days to have them go through a presentation in front of students. If you're going to decide that that's part of it, you have to ask the same questions, the same legal questions, and put everybody else through the same steps so that you are comparing those proverbial apples with apples. Clarissa?
We have the questions. If we're hiring, say, for an elementary position, we'll have a list of most likely 10 questions. Everybody on our panel is assigned a question. That way, each person is asking each interview candidate the same question. But then you take those questions that you have filled out the answers to in acquiring your information, and you fill out a rubric at the end. And then that rubric is tallied up, and that's what's used to see where everybody falls. Our superintendent is very much on being as transparent as possible in the hiring process.
Well, I applaud you, because that's the next step in this whole process. You're doing this so that you can have a rating system. And this rating system, all right, is everybody fills it out during the interviews, and then you retain this. I think somewhere else on the slide I've got that. You retain this, not forever, all right? But there's something called a purple book that says how long you have to retain something. I don't know the title of it any longer. But retain these for maybe 7 years or longer. In the event that someone files suit against you, someone gets in touch with OCR, Office of Civil Rights, and says, I was discriminated against because I'm too hairy. All right? And OCR wants to come in and investigate, and they may want to look at those records. And so the more you standardize it, as Clarissa and her district are doing, the better off you are. This is not some freewheeling process you're going through. These days, it needs to be, you need to adhere to protocols, and you need to be cognizant. A good thing to do here, by the way, for suggestions to all of you, Siobhan and others from New York City, you're going to call, you're get in touch with, well, you're going to look at the regulations and see what they say. For the rest of you, what you could do is you could call up your BOCES Labor Relations Department and ask for advice from Labor Relations. First of all, I'm presuming that you subscribe to that service, but Labor Relations is set up to give you advice and training, and that's probably what Clarissa's superintendent did. Got some advice and training, went to a workshop, because they're offered all the time, and decide, okay, this is the way it's got to be, because that's out there. And if you go to your BOCES Labor Relations Department, they will give you tips and tell you what your established protocols ought to be. All right, so you go through the interview process, and now you've got your finalist, individual or plural. Now, this is touchy because, okay, I'm going to offer a job to Michael Spear, and I just pick up the phone as the building principal, and I call his reference checks, or I call his boss. Now, you can call the reference checks typically because that's okay. They've given those reference checks on the resume because it's okay to call them. But maybe Michael has not listed his boss. So what might happen, Michael? You've not told your boss. I call up your boss and say, I'm getting ready to offer you a job. And is Michael any good? What potentially might happen there?
They might hold it against you that you're looking for another job.
Exactly. Michael's not told his boss. He may have a reason for not telling his boss. And now I call up and I ask the boss, hey, he's great. I want to hire him. And he goes, what? So after he's done talking to me, he calls up Spear and says, report to my office immediately. So you don't want to do that. First of all, you may not be authorized to call reference checks. Even if you're a building principal, you need to check with your super or your personnel department and see who is authorized. And back to your committee, make it very clear in your pre-interview training for your committees, you may not call references. Make that very clear because that can screw everything up. Oh, I know the building principal in that district. I'm going to call him up. Make it very clear. I bet you in Clarissa's district, it's very clear to those interview committees, you do not call references. So reference checks are very particular. You've got to know who's authorized to call references. And when you call the reference is important. The questions you ask during reference check are very important. All right. And there's a code, by the way, too. And when I say this, I don't want to get myself in trouble. And I don't want to say that this is any way discriminatory. But because all of us are so worried about what's called stigmatizing someone who wants to get a job in a different district through a reference check, Gina's crossing her eyes there. Stigmatizing meaning you don't want to say something bad about a person during a reference check, Gina, that it might hurt their chances. These days, Gina, many districts have policies that say you are only allowed, if you're called, Gina, if you're called to give a reference on Michael, you're his supervisor, you may by policy only be able to say that Michael does work for us. He worked for us from 2013 to 2019. And for instance, that he was satisfactory. That's all you're allowed to say. Because of so many lawsuits and so many cases with Office of Civil Rights, that districts got gun shy and started to develop policies that only allowed. Carissa, because you're doing it the right way, what are you allowed to do? Do you have a policy on reference checks?
We don't have a policy, and I was looking forward to this section because I feel like this is a very wide open section for us that I'm nervous on.
Well, with good reason, all right? So back to my first bit of advice, if you subscribe to labor relations, call them and ask, not you, of course, you're not authorized to do that, but have your super, advise your principal or your super to call to find out what you should do. Look to see if you have a policy on this, Carissa. And absent that, talk to your hiring department to see how you want to handle this. Now, back to code, superintendents and principals do have a code. One of the code questions is an easy question. Would you hire this person again? That's a simple yes or no. And you don't get yourself in too much trouble. By saying no doesn't mean the person's bad. It just means, for instance, a bad match. But that's, if you're making the call, ask that question. Would you hire this person again? And by the way, here's the code. If the person on the other line doesn't answer that question, if there's a dead silence on the other end, what do you think that means? Exactly. You just say, okay, thank you very much. I hear you. And leave it alone. All right? Some others of you will have a certain set of prescribed questions that you must ask. So on the one end, the asker is asking a certain set of questions. And these days, they send it via email and they have you write a response. Or they call you on the phone and they go through a set of 3 questions. And then you're the askee, you're the person being asked. And you give your honest answers to those, making sure you don't stigmatize someone. You got to be careful again, all right? It takes a certain skill, and there's an art to it as well. So there's a game going on here. But the best question to ask is, would you hire this person again? If they say yes, you're in good shape. If they say no, take that to the bank. If they say nothing, that's code. All right? Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that offline principals aren't talking to principals and superintendents aren't talking to superintendents. A smart principal superintendent will still be very circumspect and careful with their language. But if you're at the bar and you're having a drink and you ask about that Berghold and whether you want her as a principal, and you make a funny face, enough said. All right? I hate to say it's part of the old boys network, but that's why you're all here. Michael, excluding you, ladies have to create an old man, old gals network. All right? So that you can help each other out and do the right thing. After the reference checks, then you're going to have the offer of employment. You've done the reference checks, you're going to offer employment. You don't do that. Your personnel department does that, and your superintendent does that. All right? Because you're going to be talking about, where are you going to put the individual on the salary schedule? Can I ask if any of you lucky people were ever placed on a higher step on a salary schedule as a way to attract you into the district? Very good, Adrian. I won't ask you which, but you were boosted up. You weren't put on step 1. Very good. That's a credit to Adrian. They needed her. They wanted her. To attract her in, they offered her something more. And presuming there's nothing in the CBA that says that she must be on step 1, they were to bring her in at 3 or 5 to give her a little boost, recognizing what she did in her previous district, no doubt. Carissa?
We have a clause in our teacher contract that if somebody's coming from another district, they can't be bumped down and come in for less. We can't try and get people to come to us and pay them less, that they'll come in on an equal footing of where they were when they left, if not higher.
Very good. See what you just mentioned? Your CBA matters. Very idiosyncratic, our job. There's all kinds of places you need to check. You have some freedom, but not as much. To define what freedoms you have, you need to know what limitations are in place. What have we talked about? Board policies, collective bargaining agreements. In the case of New York City, regulations. All right. And you need to know these things. This is what this class has been all about for the last 13 weeks. What you need to know about and where you need to go to find what you need to know. I can't teach you and you can't remember everything you need to know. You just have to remember that, ooh, I do need to know something, and I can't just do what I want. All right? So after the offer of employment, then the superintendent makes the recommendation and the board appoints. So this is really all a part of that Gantt chart I talked to you earlier, and now I just went into great detail. And it's 8:49. That's good. Let's not forget that we have Equal Employment Opportunity Act, EEOC, which gives the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission authority to sue in federal courts when it finds reasonable cause to believe that there has been employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And in the case of public employment, EEOC refers to the United States Attorney General to bring the lawsuit. So there are some severe consequences if you happen to exhibit discriminatory labor practices that exclude certain protected classes of individuals. And what are the classes? The basis of race, color, national origin, sex, religion, age, disability, political beliefs, marital or familial status. And remember, we talked about this earlier too. Remember, we have a case in the Supreme Court that was recently heard that tried to say that this is the conservative point of view, was that if someone is, let me just use the term gender fluid, all right, that they're not protected. That was the argument. I'm not going to go off on get over my skis here and say how this was finally decided, but this is still being worked out. And the gender identification issue, because remember what it was? What was it? It wasn't public employment, but a guy who'd been working for an employer joined a gay baseball team, a gay softball team. Wasn't that it, Michael? And he got fired, right? And so he was relying upon this to say, you can't fire me because it says sex. And the conservative argument was that doesn't cover you for employment purposes. Now, just to make sure that you understand, when I was talking about speaking in code, et cetera, I was talking about a person's qualifications based upon job performance. By no means am I even hinting that any of these protected classes would not be protected based upon your use of the established codes for giving you information about whether to or to not hire someone. Not at all. That code I was talking about relates to job performance and job performance only. Okay? To make the point, if you were to go to Williamsville and every other central school district or any other school district, you'll find on the human resources page, for instance, you can't see this down here, but I made it bigger. You've seen this, right? The Williamsville Central School is equal employment opportunity employer. And with the compliance with laws, here it is right here. Can't discriminate against a person of age, race, color, creed, national origin, marital status, religion, sex, disability. By the way, there's a high-profile case out there on the basis of age, too, that's being heard right now, I think, in an appellate court. That's a tough one. Take me, I'm 67. What do you think would happen if I applied for a superintendent's job these days? And I probably wouldn't get a look, because someone would do the math and say, he's too old. Now, how would I be able to prove that? Who knows? Would I even want to go back and do it? I don't think so. I'm having enough fun doing this. Age discrimination is another very difficult one, but it happens. All right. So I think I went through all of the interview, the recommendations, do PD with your staff when you assign the team, script the questions, ask the same question of each candidate, look familiar, Clarissa, design a score sheet, required to complete the score sheet, collect and retain in the personnel office. Okay, we did that at 8:54. Reference checks, we did this as well. Assign the check to a certain person, experience, be careful about contact a previous employer, talk about the code, silence is an answer. I told you about some employers have policies. All right, they just give you the nothing but the years of service, the job title. We talked about this, dictated by the CBA, some latitude for starting a salary. Miscellaneous items, which can get you in trouble, either you or the superintendent. You need to know the point of view about the Board of Education towards local candidates. Now, anyone from Niagara Falls in the group? I don't think so. For instance, Niagara Falls here up in this region actually has a policy that says we'll only hire local candidates. And a Spanish teacher was recently released, and she appealed to the commissioner because she was let go because she didn't live in the district, even though she had been employed for a number of years under the same conditions. But the commissioner agreed with the board, and she was let go. But even if you don't have a policy, boards of education do have a point of view about local candidates. They want to hire the local candidate if they can, as long as they don't like. As long as they like the local candidate. Because I've had experiences that local candidate beat me over the head for a local candidate. And then I put a local candidate for the board because that was the best person we thought, principal and me. And then board members said, we don't like that local candidate. Hire someone else. Go figure. It's really difficult. But local candidate matters. Which is why a superintendent has to go to a board before recommending people, before the formal board meeting, to find out, will you support the candidates? Or are you going to give me a hard time because it is or is not the local candidate that you want? A good superintendent never goes to a board meeting Adrian, we lost Adrian. She'll come back. All right. Come on back, those of you who need to.
Sir, I think we're all having issues even hearing you. You left and came back. Something's going on with the server, I think.
Yeah, try sharing your video again.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can't see you.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you're right. It did go. I just share my webcam. Here we go. Webcam sharing locked.
Hmm.
Can I cancel my webcam? Well, maybe that's a blessing. You don't have to look at me. All right, let me keep going. Let me try it one more time. No, it's locked. Webcam sharing locked. How can I get rid of this? I don't want to leave and come back in. All right. So you need to know, and your superintendent needs to know about local candidates. That's an issue. Recognize that. Nepotism. That can be an issue too. You know what nepotism is? Hiring relations. Apparently at the federal level, in the White House, that's not an issue. Although in the Ukraine, it's an issue, but it's not in the White House. All right. But nepotism could be an issue. But notice down on the bottom, people oftentimes wonder, well, can a board member vote for a family member? Sure they can. It doesn't look good. And many times a board member Thanks, Dominique. Well, I can see you, Dominique. That's interesting. That's good. That's fine. Board members can vote for family relations and people they know. But like I said, it may not look good, and conscientious board members will oftentimes abstain, but it is legal. You can do it. But nepotism, you always have to be careful. All right? But I always felt, since a board member can vote for family relation, and since I'm always about getting the best person possible, I've recommended family members to boards of education more than one time because they were the best person for the job, at least in my mind. I was lucky to be able to not lose too many tail feathers about this. I never recommended someone who was a relation who I didn't like. Now, I lost chips doing that, and I probably lost a couple yes votes, but I always had the majority yes votes to make it go because I knew my board and I met with them in advance. This comes down to the principle, by the way. You're involved in this process, I want you to know. You should try to get yourself into these executive sessions when your superintendent is discussing this. And if your superintendent is smart, she'll include you in these discussions so that you can share the burden and lend weight to the argument as to why someone should or should not be hired. All right. Let's move on. Uh-oh. I am gonna have to leave you. I am frozen. I can't do my PowerPoint. I'm gonna log out and come back in. They cut me two ways. Take a break while I come back in, because then I'm gonna have to load the presentation again too. Take a break. Oh, good. Presentation is still there. And I have control over it. Very good. Let's see if my camera works. Ta-da-da-da. We're back. We'll still stand with the break since many people did leave. Oh, my goodness gracious. Yeah, Carissa?
So I have a question about the hiring process, and it's not necessarily even at the level of hiring teachers. We had an issue this past fall where we were hiring substitutes. Do you have to give everybody an interview? You don't, correct? Like, we had one, she was furious. We did not accept her as a substitute. She climbed the chain of command and was vicious about not being accepted. And I just want to make sure going forward that I know that we don't have to entertain them.
Well, here's the caveat again. Barring anything in your board policies, barring anything in your collective bargaining agreements, no, you don't have to bring in anybody. In fact, even the people who respond to the post based upon the CBA, you may not have to bring those people in either.
Okay.
So let me wait for people to come back on that because that's an important point, Carissa. But to answer yours in particular, no. And this will oftentimes happen, Carissa, where I'm local candidate, right? Oh yeah, scream and holler and possibly come to board meetings, certainly call up 7 board members and just make it ugly that you didn't bring them in. And you just have to hold the fort. Now, Carissa, I had a practice of bringing in all local candidates so that I could fight back that accusation. And the board was happy with that as well. Because the board felt, okay, he's doing his due diligence. We're satisfying local candidates and we're bringing them in. It kept the peace, Clarissa, and it was worth the aggravation and the extra time. You have to decide what you want to do.
And I totally agree with it. This one was just a very highly opinionated applicant that was, I think, insulted that they did not get an interview and did not get accepted. But you don't get to make the rules as a layman coming in to want to just substitute for us. That it's based on our discretion is what my prerogative was at the time. And I just wanted to follow up on that.
Although you are bringing up two different points. There's a difference between bringing someone in for an interview and hiring them. So if you can find the time to bring all the local candidates in for an interview, you're deflating half of the argument. Okay. And in fact, I guess because we did it, I would recommend that to you, Clarissa. And also because it's a small district like us, you're not going to get 30 people that are going to want to do that. You're going to get a small handful, and it's worth it. For those of you who may have come in just a little bit late, Clarissa asked a good question about, and this is very common, complaints from local candidates that they didn't get an interview. Very common, very upsetting. And one way to diffuse the argument is to make it a practice. Don't put it in policy, because you're under no obligation to do this. But make it a practice to at least interview local candidates. And that diffuses the argument. Okay? A lot of you are not back with me, so I hesitate to go on. Adrian, no camera, but you're with me. Clarissa.
Can you not see? It's Adrian. My camera is showing. You can't see me right now?
No, Adrian, but you're okay. Don't worry about that as long as you can hear us, okay? But I don't see everybody in the Michael's here. Let me just go down my list again. Stephanie, yeah, Dominique. I don't see you, Dominique. Where are you? No Dominique. Caitlin, I think it's Caitlin. No Caitlin yet. Victoria is with us. Adrian's with us. Shaban is with us. Gina. Rebecca's gone. Wendy's with us. Lindsay, you're with us.
I'm here.
Clarissa's with us. Michael. Okay, so I'm looking for Dominique and Caitlin. Caitlin, there you are. She's coming back in. Very good, Kate. And at 9 o'clock, I'm going to keep looking for Dominique. I am a stickler for fairness, and I do try to keep track as best I can who might or might not leave, go out the back door. But I'm going to presume that Dominique is having some. Okay. All right. So I now have control over this again. So any questions about what I've gone through so far? Now we're going to get into the technical detail. Any questions? Sorry about all the talking again, but there's so much content about this, and the ramifications can be really difficult. Earlier, we were talking about the codes, rules, and regulations, 30.3. All right, this one, if you noticed when I was earlier, it didn't call for the certification status. But that might have been an older version I was looking at. So this is just a summary, again, of what we were talking about that has to be in the appointments. So even if certification status is not in the reg, you should have it. Now what I'm going to show you here, oh yeah, here it is revised. The name of the appointee, tenure area, date of the commencement, the beginning of the probation service, certification status, there it is. And then a statement about APPR. So here it is in the regulation, the revised. Now, we had a good labor relations department, and what they did for us was put together a folder. This is really nice. Now, if you're super employment, labor relations, not labor, personnel department, you'll have this. But even if you're a building principal, it's good to have this. They put together for us a book, a binder, that included every bit of language that you would need for board action, for appointment of people, for termination of people, for tenure, for leaves of absence, all right, anything that a board would have to approve having to do with the employment of an individual, be they certificated or labor or civil service, it was all in the binder. So in preparation for class a couple of years ago, I called up my previous secretary and I said, hey, send me that language. And so this credit goes to the Erie 2 Chautauqua Cattaraugus BOCES Labor Relations Department. And this is sample probationary teacher appointment. And so what we would do, and here's Dominique. Good, Dominique. What we would do would simply fill in the blanks, because this comports or aligns with the Board of Regents regulations. So it's this is the resolution moved by, this would be the name of the board members who moved the motion, seconded the motion, that upon the recommendation of the superintendent, all right, Gina Malin, who holds provisional or initial or professional certification in her whatever area, all right, well, whether it be provisional, initial, or professional, got to say that, in the certification area, is hereby appointed to probation in the tenure area. Remember, we just visited the tenure areas, the certification areas. That's why this is important. You drop in the right ones, all right, for a probationary period commencing on the date and ending on, now you can't have this end on date if you recall. All right, so this is a bit old. All right, unless extended in accordance with the law, and I'm going to talk about Jewel again, don't worry. All right, it's conditional. Here's 3012, section 3012 D of 12, education law, C and D. All right. It talks about the effective and highly effective for 3 of the 4 years. Teacher shall not be eligible for tenure at that time. Name shall receive a salary for school. This is going back to Adrian's point. All right. You got to put the salary that they're being appointed to and any appropriate information vis-a-vis the CBA. So it's all here. Now, if they are civil service, it's a lot simpler. Motion made by, seconded by, the name, the position, how many weeks of the probationary period. Remember I told you it's arbitrary. Probationary period commences on, ends on, and then you get the annual salary. So it's all here in these 2 templates. This is what it should look like. But what we're going to do now, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anyone, but I had you do this. Remember, and you sent these to me? Except for those of you who haven't sent them yet, I didn't list the name of the districts. But these are your contributions that you sent to me. We're going to look for the essential elements of proper appointment language. You'll know who they are. Now, this is public information, so even though I didn't put the name of the district, the names of the individuals are actually in here because this is public information. Okay? Now, to make the point, remember, board minutes are the official record of all important decisions and authorizations. And when you run into problems and wonder who's got seniority, when were you appointed, what was your salary, all right? All of that, the best place to go is back to the board minutes. So you want to have the best board minutes you can possibly have. And as a building principal, this is going to matter to you. All right? Before I go there, let me give you a case in point. When I moved over to do an interim work, we had an issue about who had seniority in physical education. We went back to the board minutes and found that people were appointed to the tenure area of physical education and health. Now, take a guess. Is there a tenure area called physical education and health? No. Why were they appointed to that? Because phys ed teachers are oftentimes appointed to teach in health as well. But there's no tenure area called physical education and health. All right? And you've got to serve 40% in each of those areas to get tenure. All right? It needed to be more specific to this physical education tenure area and in addition to that, the health tenure area, if you're going to do it 50-50. They didn't do it. We had to sort that all through. Luckily, no harm, no foul. When we sorted that all out, it still fit. All right? And we were able to get our seniority list. Every district should maintain a seniority list. So you as a building principal, when you have to lay someone off, you call up central office and say, I need to see the seniority list for the science 7 through 12 tenure area. And they send you the list. They don't have to take time. It's a list that should be in place. A lot of districts don't do that. You need to have that. And how do you develop those lists? By the board minutes. So why is this important? Let's take a look. Let's look at the certificated appointment language first. You'll know whose is yours. Be it resolved, the Board of Education, recommendation of the superintendent, approves the following appointments with emergency conditional appointment considered safe. That has to do with fingerprinting law. Fingerprinting safe, all right? Ellen Benson was appointed to physical education teacher, middle school. Salary, effective, replacing anything you notice that might be missing. They got the position, they got the salary, got the effective date. Effective 16, this is after APPR, right, Wendy? This is after the APPR rules. So Wendy got the first thing that's missing, and so did Gina. APPR doesn't mention that. And this is a phys ed teacher, all right? What else do you find that's missing? I'm trying not to be judgmental, but I can't help it because we have to look at these things in light of the right way to do something and the problems that they might have in the future. What else do you notice? Gina, right, tenure area. Doesn't mention a tenure area, does it, Gina? Not at all. A little bit of an aside, Gina, it says physical education, middle school. Now, it makes me wonder, because I know when you appoint principals, principals can be appointed to buildings. And the seniority might be based upon a tenure area and a building. So rather than who's the most senior principal in the 7 through 12 principal tenure area, it might also be complicated by your practice or your CBA based upon the building that's in. So that could be a problem because we don't have tenure area here, Gina. And what else are we missing? Well, we don't have certification either, do we? So this one could be problematic down the road. We don't have APPR, we don't have tenure, we don't have certification. Here's another one. This might be a little hard to see. Probationary appointment of Kristen Carroll, business special education teacher, with an effective date of October. This is 2019. A 4-year probationary appointment with an anticipated tenure date of 2023. I think I read earlier that there should be no termination dates in the new regs. At a prorated salary. All right. Initial certification, student, that's good. Effective May 20 is per the term of 2018-2022. Teleteachers agreement. Expiration date is tentative and conditional. That's expiration date, good, is tentative and conditional only. Except the extent required by grant tenure to overall annual professional performance review. Yeah. So we have the certification area. What's also very important here? We got the position. Anyone see tenure area? Right, Wendy, I don't see tenure area. It's not that it can't be assumed or surmised, but why not leave a proper breadcrumb trail to follow back when putting together seniority lists when so much is dependent upon this. And by the way, back to a previous point, maybe this is 8.6. Maybe another special education teacher was appointed 8.5 and 8.4. So that would be, back to Clarissa's question, that would be the 8.5 and 8.4 would have more seniority if this was done properly, the same in the identical tenure area, just because of where they appeared in the agenda. And one was approved a minute before the next one. Got it? So this one's more extensive, but even that's problematic. Let's look at this one. Motion to approve a professional staff appointment of, now this is more like a consent agenda. B2 is Eileen Baxter, Casey Broham, Deborah Andrea, Gloria Donovan Beckman, Deanna Lamberson. What do you see going on here? It's okay to have all of them in a consent agenda, but what don't we see here? And I didn't see anything else in what was sent to me. And yeah, anything else, right? I'll capture the whole thing. I don't see tenure. I don't see certification. I don't see APPR. I don't see anything conditional. Now they talk about let's take Eileen Baxter, BAS elementary. So she has a bachelor's in elementary, which frankly doesn't matter whatsoever.
That's the school that she's in. The BAS is Brook Avenue school.
Oh, okay, so it's a building in elementary, effective approximately a day or a half a day will matter in terms of seniority lists, because when you start getting into maternity leaves and medical leaves, FMLA leaves, Family Medical Leave Act, days matter. Half a days matter in terms of seniority. So if it's approximately, I don't know what that means. I don't want any of you to fess up to this. Don't say anything. But this one is problematic from a lot of different reasons. All right, now this one is done in a very formal resolution style. Let's see if this district's got everything in it. Whereas the superintendent of school recommends Miranda Yoli, even says her Ms. Yoli, and we actually have Sullivan West Central. Okay. To a probationary term as elementary teacher, an annualized salary, minus applicable withholdings and deductions. That's very specific. That's okay. With compensation for master's degree initial credits, the document as presented. Now, possesses a New York State Child Education grade initial certificate. Good. Got all our certificates here. Okay, good. Got the salary here. That's good. In accordance with 3012 education law. All right. She has to have the composite overall ratings. Do we see tenure? Yeah, elementary tenure area. Elementary tenure, yeah, I think that, what was it before? Elementary tenure area, does anyone still have on your other pages? Is there a tenure area called elementary tenure? Elementary? Yeah, okay, so that's good. This is a good one. So kudos to Sullivan West. Got everything here, very formal. As opposed to, see why that matters? What do we got here? It was mentioned by Ms. Bartlett, that's a board member, seconded by Mrs. Murphy, to approve Shelley Van Duzen, physical education teacher for information appointment, tenure area phys ed, good. Step 8, September, effective, missing, well, APPR, and a certification. Here's the good thing. The fact that those two things are missing is an omission without a consequence. Because certification doesn't count for tenure, for seniority, so that doesn't really matter. And that language about APPR, it's supposed to be in there vis-a-vis the regulations, but that's like no harm, no foul either. So at least the most important stuff is in here. Okay? Here, English to speakers of other language, effective. So they talk the position, and there's no tenure area in here. All right, so that's problematic. Do you have to list specific salary, or can it say what step? Yeah, you can just do that, Gina. You can just say the step. And oftentimes, Gina, because no one, even though it's public information, Gina, people don't necessarily like their salaries being publicized out there. So many of us would prefer to put the steps in there. And there's another good reason to put the step. Then there's no disputing. You put just the salary, then you got to look for the step. And it could get a little confusing. If you put the step and the credits, then it's very clear. You just go right to that in the salary schedule, right, Gina? So that's a good question. Yeah, Michael, you're right. I didn't get it in. Okay. So here we have a position, but we don't have a tenure. And we don't have all the other required language either. Initial certification is in there. The appointment date. Tenure area special education. I would, remember we talked earlier about all this, the clearly distinct special education tenure areas. I never mastered them. I was leaving as they were coming into fore. I never mastered them, and I can't say if special ed, does anyone know? I don't know if special ed is a tenure area. There's so many distinct ones. So that's something I would check. We've got the salary. We've got APPR. A lot of these are missing the SAVE legislation, the conditional appointments because of SAVE and fingerprinting. That should be in there as well. I think I've made the point. I'm not going to go on. Here's another one. Actually, there is no social studies tenure area. It's social studies 7 through 12. And we don't have tenure area, and we don't have certification. It says area, business teacher. It doesn't say tenure area. Everything is well and good until the poop hits the fan and someone starts to argue about who's more or least senior. Then you got problems. And then remember, like I said earlier, building principal, you're the one who gets left with whatever's left after the fight. So you want to try to get it right from the very beginning. Now, here's one we've got. What do you see here? Because this is a little bit different than all the others. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but this is obviously a consent agenda item. I'll explain that in a minute. Well, we've got payroll, HR manager, assistant superintendent, dean of students, a photographer, modified boys baseball. This is all mixed up. It's got all different types of positions. A board agenda and then the minutes ought to be clearly defined. Instructional appointments, non-instructional appointments, coaching and advisor appointments, so that it's easy to read, all right, and easy to catalog. But this one, let's take Clarissa. This is Clarissa. Probationary appointment as K through 12 district position of K through Dean of Students. So what's your tenure area, Clarissa? Are you a teacher on special assignment?
District administration. He put it in a broad term. That way we can be moved within our position, but our tenure does not have to start over.
So where are you accruing seniority? In what tenure area? If you don't have to answer this, Clarissa. I shouldn't be doing this to you. Let's move on unless you care to answer questions.
I'm drawing a blank right now, but it's administrative.
There's no tenure area called administrative.
Let me look it up.
No, you don't have to look it up. Questions for the boss. What tenure area am I accruing seniority in? You see where it comes into play? I'm not saying that there were ill intentions here, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on Clarissa's employer, but this is where it comes to play. Clarissa, what before you were appointed to this, what was your tenure area?
It was an elementary educator.
Elementary education. So, are people passing her by who were hired after her? Are they
As far as right now?
Are they jumping over Clarissa
Yes.
in elementary ed?
Yes.
And is she accruing? You don't have to answer, Clarissa. These are rhetorical questions. Are they jumping over her because she's now the K through 16 of students? And if they are, in what area is she accruing seniority, if any? Because she's not been appointed to a tenure area. By the way, Clarissa, I'll give you a tip. Easiest way to overcome this problem is to be a teacher on special assignment appointed to Dean of Students. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on what my tenure area is, but the reason he did not put me on a teacher as a special assignment is because when I then switched over, if I was in a building principal, then my tenure area would change. We just had another change within our district, and that administrative leader is now going to be the leader of curriculum. And she would have started her tenure area over again. And so in efforts for a small district not to have to do that with tenure starting over and over again, he is putting us all under the same umbrella.
Doesn't say that here. Doesn't say that here. Who says?
Well, in my contract, it says that.
The board didn't approve the contract. The board approved this resolution. The
Okay.
contract's with the superintendent. What did the board approve? I'm sorry I'm being a pain in your butt, Clarissa, but you're a good object lesson, all right? It all may be well-intentioned and it all may work out. And as long as there's no dispute, it'll be fine. But if a dispute arises, you go back to the board minutes because that's what the board approved. Only the board can approve appointments. Superintendent can only recommend. This is a very good case in point as to why a clear paper trail in the board resolutions matters. Not only is it a regulatory requirement, but you see how the questions generate based upon this type of a incomplete resolution. Of course, please excuse me, but I couldn't help it. It just really makes the point. And I hope I don't make trouble for you and your employer either. All right. Okay. Okay, let me go. Now let's take a look at civil service. This is a lot simpler. School bus driver, buildings and grounds. There's the position. There's no tenure area. All right. There's the grade and the step. There's the effective date. You don't need to put this purpose, but that's good to have a record of that if you want. I think everything's there that you need. Here's the emergency conditional appointment consistent with SAVE. That's an important thing to have in there as well. For legal purposes, if a child gets abused or fingerprinting goes awry, I told you that story a couple weeks ago about fingerprinting and what I had happen with the substitute teacher who murdered a child in Long Island. All right. Addition of the non-clinical classroom. Oh, this is This is I put this one in here. This is not for the assignment. I must have overlooked this, but this is good. Here's where they created a position. The board created a non-competitive classification of one contract bus driver position in district staff. This was in Tully. So this was a resolution. You'll get credit for whoever's in Tully. Don't worry about it. But this makes the point. This is how you create positions. Here's a bunch of people. This must be that same district. Jennifer Brunner, Para, Michael Carter Moore, Para. This does raise the point, doesn't it, Victoria, as to who is most senior and what your practice is. Here's a Para, MGC Para. Here's a Para, MGC Para. Here's another Para. We don't know the answer, but who's most senior after all's said and done? And we also, I don't see anything having to do with salary. I don't know anything regarding probation. Oh, thank you, Wendy. They'll have different start dates. Yeah, that's good. That's going to help us right there. Sorry, Victoria. Wendy sorted that out for us. All right. But I still say it's okay to have these everybody all at once in one place, but there's not enough information here to really help us out later on if there's disputes. All right, it's 9:35. I made the point, I hope. Right? I belabored the point, actually, unfortunately. Stephanie's giving me the eye there. That you got to get it right. And you got to put the details in here because it's going to matter at some point in time. This, by the way, this is what's referred to as a consent agenda. Approval of the following non-instructional appointments. I've got another example for you too. This is the consent agenda. Approve all certified and non-certified resolution personnel changes made by Sharon Wells, second by James Trujillo. From 19-5C1 through 19-5-C14. So 9 appointments were made with this one resolution. That's a consent agenda. So your board needs to know that you can't vote no to these. If you vote no, you vote no for all of them. If you vote yes, you vote yes for all of them. And that's why a good superintendent, when he puts together the agenda, in advance is going to talk to the board and ask them if they have any other any reason to not put it in consent. Because if someone's going to vote no to one of them, you got to pull it from consent so that it works. We're not going to get through all this because there's more that we have to do, but that's okay. We'll end at 10 o'clock. Thumbs up. Do you see why you got to get it right the first time? And Clarissa was a very handy case in point. Okay. All right. But, Clarissa also made another point. Small districts really struggle with this because they're trying to maximize flexibility. And that's what I heard in Clarissa's point. You're trying to maximize flexibility. We also had this problem in Gowanda, Clarissa. And in the beginning, we had administrators appointed to tenure areas and then by building. Not because that's a building tenure area, but that was a practice that we had. And then we wanted to change it to move people around. And so we changed it by board resolution to codify it and memorialize it, Gina, or Clarissa. Okay, I've got some miscellaneous probationary tenure items that we need to talk about. Because then as a building principal, you need to know this as well. This is all about the content. This is all about selected, recruiting, and appointing personnel. Additionally, up to 2 years of service as a regular substitute teacher may be applied towards probationary service. It's called JREMA credit. JREMA credit. You may receive, this is from UFT, you may receive credit to reduce your probationary time if you worked as a regular substitute or as an appointed teacher in the same licensed area and same division in which you're subsequently approved. So if you're in a district You filled in, you came in for maternity leave, for instance. You came in, you thought you were going to serve 6 months and you were a long-term sub. But then that individual, that woman did not come back, or that man did not come back, all right? Maybe the male was on an FMLA, didn't come back. And now you served 2 years as a long-term substitute. And then at the end of that 2-year term, you were appointed to that position on a probationary basis. With JURIMA credit, you can gain up to 2 years. All right? In that long-term sub position. You need to have been appointed by the board as a long-term sub in that certification and tenure area. All right? Long-term sub is different than a per diem sub. You know that. But you can get credit for that. Think about your own circumstances, whether or not you were ever in this situation. There's something also called a JUUL agreement, which allows a district to grant an extra year of probation to certificated staff. This is what usually happens. Someone's appointed to probation. They go through 4 years. They have 3 years of proper, effective or highly effective ratings. They could be appointed tenure, but there's something that just doesn't feel right. And you'd say to them, I'm not going to appoint you. And you go back and forth to the union on behalf of the teacher. And you say, okay, we'll give you an extra year. That's permissible. And it's called a JUUL agreement. Why JUUL? Because someone got in trouble with this and they appealed to the PERB, Public Employee Relations Board. Dominique, shut your mic off, Dominique, because all your clicks are showing up. See why I like that little feature there, Wendy? I was able to tell who was clicking. All right, so you can give JUUL was the person who brought suit to PERB, and PERB said, we can't give you tenure, only boards can do it, but you can get an extra year. It was called a JUUL agreement. Now, if someone is in the second year and you're not sure, well, they still have 4 years. You don't need an extra year when they're anything less than 4. Got it? That's a JUUL agreement. You do that with the union, all right? Teachers who are appointed to probationary may have that period reduced by 1 year if you receive tenure from another district. Remember when I went through NYSET thing? That if you got tenure in another district, and if you come into the new district in that same tenure area and certification, you can get 1 year lobbed off of your probation because you had tenure in another district. Remember what I said about Lowton science tenure areas could complicate it. And I've been saying all along, to Victoria in particular, you can get tenure if you work 40% of the time in a tenure area. So, you know, Victoria, this is why record keeping is so important. Because maybe you were appointed full-time 1.0 FTE in the first year, and in the second year, you went back to and you worked 0.4 in your tenure area, 40% of the time, and then 1 year you were just maybe 0.2. The records in the high school office has to show that, to show how, because the board agenda is not going to show you going back and forth from 0.4 to 0.2, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to have to be documented somewhere else. And you know where else, Victoria? Typically in the payroll department. That's going to know you were 0.2 someplace and 0.6 someplace else. That's where that'll be recorded. Records really, really matter when it comes to seniority and tenure areas. So these are things that a building principal needs to know as well. Let's talk about probation and notice requirements. We've got 15 minutes. Let me try to get through this. I teach E&L, so we were discussing if it would be an E&L, social studies, or both. Well, again, Victoria, depends on the time that you spent in either or, all right? So, probation and notice requirements. There are requirements that you have to give an employee notice 60 days notice if you're going to terminate a probationary certificated employee. Remember what I said about civil service? There's no notice requirement for probationary people. It's just good practice to be a good employer and to give someone, 2 weeks notice. But certificated individuals, including teaching assistants, get 60 days notice. This is how it works. Probation is for 4 years, right? Under new APPR. There's an Education Law 3031. It's a 30-day window for the superintendent to discuss an executive session with the board, followed by 30-day prior notice. So you're going to, the superintendent, based upon the recommendation of the building principal, you got to give the employee a 30-day notice. So, Carissa, I'd like you to meet with me, and I'd advise you to bring your union representative into my office. And when you come in, Carissa, I'm going to give you a 30-day notice. And I say to you that in the next board meeting, 30 days from today, Carissa, I'm going to be recommending to the board that you be terminated in 30 more days. So there's your 60-day notice. Now, of course, here's the caveat, unless more time was agreed to in the CBA. This is a non-mandatory topic. You don't have to agree to give people more time. Some districts have been crazy enough to give people more notice requirements. What happens when you give someone a 60-day notice? What starts to happen with their performance? It starts to tank, right, Siobhan? Got a lot of movies, burning up their sick days, their vacation days, whatever, or their sick days and their personal days. Not a good practice. So you want to give them as least amount of time as possible. The law allows for 30 days. How does this work? Here's a sample timeline to terminate probation. Now, under all circumstances, you got to give them certificated people 60 days. The example I've got here is an end of the year example. All right? Now, this is based upon one premise, that if you're a teacher or a principal, I want you gone by June 30th. I could have you gone by August 30th, before September 1st start, but I want to get into the hiring pool that starts in the spring, right? So this is based upon that premise. So on March 1st, I'm going to meet with all my principals. I'm talking about superintendent now. Principals are going to get together with me to discuss employee status with the superintendent. Your superintendent should be calling you in on or about March 1st. Let's talk, all of you are either principals or teachers on the screen right now. I'm going to talk about each and every one of you. Let's say you're all teachers. I'm talking about each and every one of you with your principal. Am I going to keep you? Am I going to give you tenure? Are we going to work out a jewel? What am I going to do? Because at the April board meeting, based upon your advice to me, I'm going to meet with the Board of Education and I'm going to apprise them of our collective intent. What are we as the instructional leaders in the district going to do? And why am I going to do that? Because I'm going to hear if the board are going to give me a hard time because I want to get rid of Caitlin because she's a district resident. If I'm going to get rid of Michael because he's the board president's son. All right. I got to hear that in advance. And I'm dragging you into that meeting with me, board principal. I'm dragging you in with me because we're going to do this nasty one together. All right? So I want to apprise the board at the April board meeting because after I do that with the board and I know that I'm good, solid standing, super, then I'm going to meet with you, all right? Caitlin, I'm picking on you. Caitlin, you're getting tenure. Carissa, you're getting tenure. Gina, you're in your second year. I'm going to give you notice that we're getting rid of you. Michael, we're not exactly sure about you. I'm going to give you a jewel year, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so now I know this. And in those of you who I'm not going to bring back, I'm going to meet with you after I met with the board and give you your notice. All right. Now, actually, I'm going to counsel them at the same time. I'm calling them in. I'm going to give them a written notice that doesn't say very much at all. I'm not going to be recommending you 30 days hence to the Board of Education. All right. Now you've got the first half of your 30-day notice. Now here's the good thing that happens. You're with the union. And if all I'm obligated to do, if you ask me for a reason, I just have to give a reason. You're a poor communicator. That's it. I'm not going to go through the whole litany. This time I've had it with you anyways. All right? Now, I would also counsel you that we can make all of this go away if you resign. And, you know, Ginny, you're not a bad teacher. It's just not a good fit. And so we might talk about actually writing a recommendation letter for you. All right? It'll be vague, but it won't hurt you. And in good conscience, we could do that because there are people like that. It just doesn't work. If you're really bad, I'm not going to do any of that. All right? In fact, if you're really bad, I'm going to give you a 30-day notice and pay you while you go away. I've done that too. All right? But you, with the union there, you talk about how you could all make this whole thing go away. And if they say, yes, I'll resign, I tell them you've got between now and the next board meeting to give me a resignation letter, a non-rescindable resignation letter, because if you rescind it, I'm recommending you terminate it. So I hold all the cards. You follow me? And then, presuming that we get all that worked out, if you don't resign, then at the May board meeting, I recommend to the board that you be terminated, all right, on June 30th, which is on the second half of the 30-day notice. So you see, by the time I meet with you and give you notice on paper, that's the first 30 days, then the board meets, and that's the next 30 days. Now, this timeline is enforced but adjusted depending on the time of year the superintendent says to recommend termination. But the 60-day notice is always in effect. As a building principal, you need to know this. And you need to know, we have a saying in the profession, when in doubt, get them out. Because once you're provided with tenure, then how am I going to get rid of you? You tell me. What do I have to go through to get rid of you? Siobhan, I think I saw your lips move.
3020A.
Exactly.
Right.
Last I knew, 16 months and $160,000. And a lot of ill will. Michael? Good, Siobhan.
What if, I don't know if they changed it. You still need a 3020A if a teacher's rated ineffective for 2 years or 3 years in a row?
I don't think so, Michael. No. You're stuck with them because then they have due process, and 3012C nor D outlined what to do, whether any of that mattered once they got tenure. Because as you can see, they would have had to amend 3020A as well, because you would have two laws in conflict with each other. Okay?